Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project, Season 3, Episode 9. And today, we're gonna kind of get clickbaited a little bit, but not really, but a little bit. Because if you're listening to this, clearly you saw the name of this episode, which is Saying Goodbye to the Enthusiasm Project. Which doesn't sound, I just wanted to put the dramatic pause right there. It's not as scary as it seems, but last week I touched on like the sort of what seemed to be like a spontaneous rebranding of my YouTube channel, which I recognize in the grand scheme of things on the earth, especially things happening right now, is a very small, it's pretty small potatoes, but in the grand scheme of what, I focus on in my life, it's actually, it's kind of a big deal because it's, especially on a platform such as YouTube, it's kind of always in the back of your head where, even if you're not trying to dominate the platform or be as big as possible, you're always worried that you're going to do something that, angers the algorithm wizard that's in charge. And then that means you're not going to, like something's just going to happen and your channel's just going to tank or YouTube's going to start ignoring it or something like that, which, everybody who has a channel, I would say just about everybody, wants to grow to some degree, whether that's, gold play buttons out the wazoo or if it's just kind of like a steady increase or something and, no real monetary benefit. But I think most people want to grow. I don't think most people want their audience to stagnate or to shrink or anything like that. And so when you make these changes, you're sort of scared of that because I know content-wise nothing is changing, but the container, I guess you could say the lenses aren't changing, but the glasses frames are changing, and I just hope that that doesn't affect anything, or it's even for the better. And so far, it's been pretty positive, and I wanted to kind of return to it for this week because even though it doesn't sound like a big thing, I think for anybody who creates something or wants to put something out there, obviously like sort of coming up with your name, coming up with your brand is a huge part of it. And that's such a tough nut to crack. And when you do, it just feels so like satisfying to have hit the thing. And, now you have the name, you have the vision, you have the whole brand put down. And then you just sort of think like, well, that's it. Now that's my brand forever. Or that's my, that's how I'm doing things forever. And so to suddenly change that is very strange and just hoping that doesn't hurt anything in the future. But the first time I talked about it, I was still sort of trying to navigate how I felt because I was sort of processing, it's not just a name for like a YouTube channel. That's a very superficial thing. For me, it represents so much more because it is, a YouTube channel, but it's something that I started, which is very personal to me. It's a very big part of my life. Getting to the point of starting, like there's just so much behind it. And that name is attached to so much of that. And it's sort of scared. It's almost like a security blanket where like, can I continue and can things continue with this or without this or do I need to stay exactly as it is if I want to have any sort of, growth or success or anything. But after a few more weeks have gone by and after I've sort of tested the waters, I'm actually feeling super good about where things are. And the coolest part is a whole bunch of things are now starting to fall into place. And it really goes back to that super old expression of murder your darlings, which is a very graphic sounding thing. But I'm sure, sometimes people say kill your darlings, murder your darlings, whatever it is. I learned about it when I was in college for my English degree as a term in the literature world where writers would get so attached to a piece of writing, a sentence or a phrase or a chapter or whatever, and they would just love it so much, but the rest of their piece couldn't come together for whatever reason. And it wouldn't be until they decided to just get rid of that thing that they loved so much that everything else fell into place. And that always stuck with me because jumping into the world of like video editing and stuff, that exact thing happens all the time. You have a shot or a sequence or a scene or whatever it is, and you just love it. You just kind of watch it over and over again because it looks so good and it sounds good and it just feels good to see and it's just perfect. but the bigger project just isn't like coming together for some reason, and you're trying to figure it out, and you're like, why can't the whole thing be as good as, this one little part right here? And then you realize, oh, if I get rid of that little part, everything else naturally fits together in a much stronger way. But it does mean that I lose that thing that I love so much. And you got to kind of navigate that with yourself and work on that to get to a point where, you're okay with that. And that's really, really tough. And I think in my case, this whole name change thing was that, because through that, so many other little things have just sort of fallen into place that make me really excited and kind of make a lot more sense than I thought they would in the past. So when I say saying goodbye to the Enthusiasm Project, it's mostly true because the name is sort of going away, but not 100%, and for very specific reasons. So what I've learned, and this is I'm almost going to have a sentence here. As I've been back in the world of like teaching, one of the biggest things I do, and I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness, is I tend to over contextualize everything, because I'm always so worried that my students will feel like they're learning something for no reason. Like, why is the teacher giving us this assignment? Why are we doing this? And so it's really important to me that they always understand we're doing this because this and this and this, and this is how it fits into a bigger picture. And I feel like I do that naturally just in my life, but if I'm recording a podcast, like I just finished teaching for the day a little while ago, and so I'm still very much in that mindset of we need to make sure we contextualize everything. And so I don't want to just sort of talk about like, hey, why don't you tune in and listen to dude talk about like his YouTube channel again? Like, no. But what I want to do is sort of share this part of the process that I've never gone through before, because I think there's a lot of helpful stuff to be gleaned from it. And I think that it's something, had I heard this, like a year ago, maybe I would have taken that leap then. And it's just sort of the way things are fitting together. I think that would have been a cool thing to do. So that's sort of my purpose in sharing the story. It's not just to make it the Tom Show, even though literally I'm changing everything else to just be my name, which is something I'll talk about in a minute, because wow, does that feel super narcissistic. But here's one thing I learned. I mentioned last week when Peter Lindgren and Heather and I were first talking, and Peter was the one that suggested, hey, Tom, have you ever thought of changing the name of your channel to just your name? And it kind of like blindsided me a little bit, but then Heather immediately was like, oh my gosh, yes. And that was so confusing. But one of the things Heather asked was, why do you want to keep using this name? Is it because you really like it and you stand behind it, or are you just like married to the idea of it and that's just how it's been for so long? And I really didn't know the answer. I couldn't differentiate the two. It was the same thing to me. And so having just spent several weeks, thinking about it and figuring it out and living with a change, I definitely learned that I was absolutely more married to the idea than the thing itself, because the way that I feel now is just so much more positive. I feel like it was definitely the right choice. Let's just put it that way, like to spoil the whole thing. And so I'm wondering how often it is that you go to make a decision or you want to make a change, and you really do have a tough time determining if your hesitation is because the thing that you have is great and maybe it doesn't need to be changed, because, change for the sake of change is usually very annoying and kind of a dumb thing to do oftentimes. But is it something where the change would be ultra positive, but you're just so used to the way things have been that it just feels strange to do something different? It's like, taking your room and it's been the same way for 10 years and now you rearrange it and flipped everything over. Like, is it bad or is it just different? And, how could it actually be better, but it feels unfamiliar because you're not used to it? And sort of navigating those kinds of things is really tough to do, especially when you're just one person. And I'm not lamenting being one person, because I like being a one person, creative team, whatever you would like to call it. I think that's a strength, and that's something that I value very highly, but it also means you don't have the the marketing team that's like, yes, well, trends in 2020 say that you should be using your personal name and not a separate entity, like, I don't know. I'm just sort of like winging it based on gut instinct. So that's kind of where we're at. But I definitely learned I was more married to the idea than the thing itself, which is kind of dangerous because then you just keep doing the same thing over and over again without really thinking. And so I'm super curious. And there's no way to really know because you can't directly do any kind of A/B testing. But I'm very curious how my channel will perform and how it will grow and how people will react to it going forward versus how they had been or how they would have had I not made the change. Because from what I've seen, it's not that there's been a huge change, and there really hasn't been. It's only been a few weeks. There hasn't been enough time to even tell if there's been a big change. But from what I've seen, it kind of seems more positive. Like it has been helpful to the channel in a number of ways. For me, one of the big benefits is it really makes things more personable, which was ultra jarring at first because if you get like a notification or if my phone buzzes and a little notification pops up because someone left a comment or replied to something on my YouTube channel, it just says, Tom Buck, I don't think that you're right when you say blah, blah, blah. And it's like everybody's just calling you out by your name. And that's sort of intense at first. When I'm used to seeing it would be like, the Enthusiasm Project, I think you should have done blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, that's the Enthusiasm Project. That's not me. But now, no, it is just me. But I actually also really like it because it's almost like if you've ever been in a situation where you're wearing a name tag, like, I don't know, like a work conference or something, and then you kind of forget you're wearing the name tag and you like go out, like say you have a work conference in a convention center or something, but then you go out into the world and people will call you by your name just because you're wearing your name tag and you forget. And it feels like really friendly just to be out in the world and people are like, Tom, and you're like, oh, this is nice. It kind of feels like that because that's the only way people can refer to me unless they would use some kind of like insult or something. But it's just sort of like people calling me by my name. And I remember very consciously in high school really deciding like, I want to go by Tom instead of Thomas. Cause I had always just done like, I don't know, I'd been Thomas my whole life because my grandpa was Tom and I was Tom. It just made sense. I guess it was like convenient for everybody else. But in high school, I was just like, I got to a point, my friends and I had started a band. And I use the term band very loosely for like the recordings we were making with Casio keyboards and terrible guitar amps and robot voices and stuff. But of course, 2002, I was going to use Microsoft Front Page and build a website for our band. And we started with like all these really dumb stage names. And then eventually I was like, you know what, we need to just switch and just use like our real names. And I remember going like, well, do I put Thomas or Tom? And like, keep in mind, like this is a website in 2002. Nobody is visiting this website like ever. But to me, whatever I put on there was like, that's out in the world. Like people, like there's going to be a shift in the zeitgeist or something because of my choice of name on here. And I remember the thought I had was, I always introduce myself as, my name is Thomas, and any jobs I had at that point, the managers call me that, my teachers call me that, but my friends and some of my family always just called me Tom. It was like when people got to know me, it was like they just got lazy and didn't want to say the second syllable, so they would just call me Tom. And that always made me feel like really nice because it was so friendly and it was so informal. And I thought, well, if that's just how I went through the world, wouldn't that feel friendlier? Like, wouldn't it feel like everybody I talk to, they just sort of, it's just warmer than my like more formal name. And so I switched it to Tom. And I remember being like ultra nervous and refreshing the page and checking my little page counter at the bottom, and nobody saw it, but to me it was a big deal. Anyway, this is like a version of that. So that was 2002. This is 2020. It's the same basic thing, tomato, tomato, like, except this time at least there are people actually paying attention, which is different. And it's just nice when you feel like someone's a stranger, but they're already calling you by your informal name. And on YouTube too, most people, it really does seem like use their regular name. And so then you just can say like, thanks, so-and-so, this is how I do blah, 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 or whatever, whatever the comment or the conversation is that you're having, it is really nice just to be able to use real names. It makes everything so much more personable and so much more approachable. And I kind of knew that before making the change, but I didn't realize how different it would make the overall experience. So it's been wildly positive overall, but there have been these finer points, which was, I thought, very funny, because when I had the conversation with Peter and Heather originally, they were like, have you ever thought of doing this? And the thing I just said sort of to myself, but out loud, was, well, I'll need to like mock up some graphics and see what it looks like. And both of them were like, why do you need graphics? Like, you're overthinking it, just change the name. But to me, it was like, how would this look in a channel banner? How is this going to look on a website? How would it feel as a URL? Like, for some reason, that stuff, like, what would it look like in a semi-tangible format, was really like, it was really crucial for me to be able to wrap my head around the idea. And part of the fear that I had was like, let's put it this way, regardless of your political opinions, our current president in the United States is someone who puts his name in giant golden letters on everything that he owns. I don't want to do that. There's just something that's not a thing I would like to do. And so with that in mind, sitting here literally filming myself talking, spending time editing my face on the computer, uploading it to a channel that has my name on it, and then changing, there's a lot of me and my name, and it feels very narcissistic. And I had right before all of this, I had just gotten like the branding for the Enthusiasm Project so on point. I was so happy with everything. I had, done these like animated logos and stuff that were really, really great. And that was a fun process. I don't know if I've mentioned that in an episode or not, but that was another Peter thing, which is because when he and I talk on our podcast, but even just in general, we just sort of like talk a lot about YouTube and the strategy behind it and stuff. And we were sort of talking about logos and things like that. And he was like, oh, it's so nice to have a logo. He's like, I didn't think I would care. His logo is just his initials. And it's like this very slick little thing. And I was like, yeah, that's really cool. And he has some design sense. Like, he's a very good designer, aesthetic person. But he hired someone to do his logo. And I was like, oh, I've never hired someone. Like, I could never do that. I could never hand off something so personal to somebody else. And he was like, well, here's the person I used. He's super cool. He's super affordable, ultra talented. And I was like, okay. And I kind of like, I sent some emails, talked to him a little bit, looked at portfolio. I was like, this work is really good. It would be crazy to see like what somebody else would make. Like I know my design styles, and when you make something, you tend to just sort of stay in your own world. So even when you're trying to do something a little different, there's just sort of like your approach with any kind of art. Like, this is it's my style. It's just sort of how it looks and how it feels because I'm doing it. What would it look like if somebody else, totally objective third party, took a stab at this? And then we were going back and forth, and he was like, okay, I just need you to tell me a little bit more about what you're trying to communicate, and if you could send me over any resources. And I was like, yeah. So, a big part of my like quote unquote brand is things are being very, DIY, and it's just me doing everything. It doesn't have to be perfect. I want it to be really good. I want things to be, exceptional in their own way, but they don't have to be perfect. So, like all my writing is just hand done. It's just my own font. And he's like, okay, well, you could send me over, like some of those files and whatever. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, if literally part of what I think, or at least part of what I value about what I do, and maybe what I'm hoping other people value, is the fact that it is me just doing everything, and it's very hand done and imperfect. It seems kind of strange to literally send someone else my own like handwriting files so that they can create, a logo or a brand or whatever. And it had nothing to do with the designer, who's super excellent, and I would 100% use if I needed somebody to design stuff. But I just had to tell him, I was like, like going through this process makes me realize I really do need to be the one to make this, because that's what I would expect. Like, if I found my own stuff and saw what I do, I would expect that person made everything, and I would be kind of disappointed if they didn't. And so then I put together a nice logo for the Enthusiasm project, started putting it on the videos, which was really cool because I know that sounds just like logo, but it changed the structure of the videos because having that intro hook is really important, because most people will click on a video, and if it's not interesting, they'll click out within the first few seconds. And so I have not even started, but maybe like 6 months ago. It's been a while. I started trying to open every video with like a very cool, visually appealing thing. Maybe it's a super close-up on a product or a cool montage or a weird slow motion something that's going to catch your interest. But because just random montages don't hold interest very well, I always then also start it with the voiceover. So it's like as soon as that video kicks in, the video starts at 0 minutes and 00 seconds, like from the beginning. It's not skip. I don't know if you know this or not. I think it's the number 3. If you're watching YouTube on your computer and you press number 3, it will skip 30% of the way through the video. And the reason for that is because on average, most videos don't actually get to the content until about that time point. Because at the beginning is just sort of random stuff, life updates, sponsor this, and then you finally get to the thing the video came from. And I don't want that. I want if someone skips ahead, they go, oh, dang it, and I got to go back because I missed it. Yes, I want the video to deliver what it says it's going to or something valuable from the first second. But transitioning, it hasn't been difficult, but transitioning from that to then me or whatever, like the non-opening sequence spin has always felt a little bit clunky to me. And having the logo has been great because I can start with this montage, do a voiceover. The logo is 3 seconds long. Like I made it super short, so we're not wasting time. It's just 3 seconds, and I can kind of add it in so it has different music behind it every video. It has a different imagery behind it, but the logo itself is the same. It's been really fun to edit with, and then it can transition right to me, and it works really well. So not only did I not want to lose that logo I had just made because I spent hours and hours animating it and I really liked it, but also I didn't want to lose the structure that it brought to my videos because that was a really helpful thing for me to have creatively. And so I was like, okay, well, I can just change it. So instead of saying the Enthusiasm Project, I can just say Tom Buck. And then I was like, I cannot do that. I can't just... You go to Tom Buck's channel to watch his video with his name on and his face talking at you, and it's just like, God, like this guy is in love with himself is just the vibe that initially put into my head. And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, most of the people, I went through my subscription feed, and I was like, you know what? Most people I am subscribed to use their own names, and if they use their name in a title or a logo or their initials or whatever, I don't find it narcissistic. I find it as like, they're branding their thing that they did. Like it totally makes sense to me. Some, you can definitely take it too far, and a few people do, but for the most part, I don't, like it doesn't seem weird to me, but me doing it seems really weird. But that's also how just starting YouTube in the beginning felt anyway. It's how starting a podcast felt in the beginning. Other people can do that, but I sure couldn't just like press record and then be there talking about stuff. No, you totally can. It's just you're not used to it, and it feels really weird. And this was kind of the same thing because once I did it, it's like, if I step back and I look objectively, it actually makes sense. Plus, going back to my experience of one of the reasons I wanted to change the name in the first place was people had no idea who I was, which isn't an issue in terms of ego. It's an issue in terms of people cannot, they do not know how to refer to me. They do not know how to contact. It just becomes very confusing. And I had tried putting my name everywhere. I had tried saying my name in the video. I had tried putting my name on screen, in the descriptions, everywhere. And it still wasn't working. And so even though to me it feels like overkill to have my name in all these places, and I'm definitely not used to seeing that, I don't think it's overkill to other people. And also, clearly, other people aren't going to see every single instance of it. They're just going to see whatever happens to catch their eye the most. So it's probably not going to seem super excessive. I now have the new logo up in my most recent video, and nobody has said anything other than, hey, how did you animate that logo? Because they just want to know how to do a logo animation, which I take as a very good sign because it just means it feels natural, it feels right, and it looks good enough that someone wants to do it for themselves too. So that's always the best compliment, obviously, right? And once I got over that narcissistic thing, which a big key to that was realizing, because you can, like I said, definitely take it too far. I'm going to just name a name here. And I hope I don't ruffle any feathers, but I'm gonna use Peter McKinnon as an example, who's one of the biggest photo camera, filmmaking channels on YouTube, if not the biggest. Definitely, has motivated me, and I've learned a lot from him. So I'm not putting him on blast for that, but I do think he takes personal branding too far. He has a channel with 5 million subscribers. Probably makes more money in a month than I make in a year, so clearly probably knows what he's doing way better than I do. But when I hear himself refer to himself as PM, or every single thing has to have a signature on it, or if he cuts away to an image that doesn't take up the full screen in a video, instead of just having a black background or a blurred out version of the image as the background, it's his name going across the screen. It's just, there's a lot of name and initials all over everything, to the point where it does stand out to me as being a little too much. But then if I look at Peter Lindgren, for example, where he starts a video, it has his initials, he jumps into it, that feels very, very natural. So I think it can be overdone, and I feel bad putting, it's not even, look, Peter McKinnon will be fine. I still enjoy him very much, but sometimes I feel like that's just a little too much, and that's not something I wanted to do, was go to that level with it. But again, he clearly knows things I don't know. But my whole point in going kind of down that road is just understanding that once I realized it seemed fine when other people do it, it was just sort of that spotlight syndrome of being scared to be the one in the center of attention, but it's okay. Similarly, actually, I'm just remembering this to when I started teaching. You know how uncomfortable it is to be in a classroom as the teacher when you're just starting out, especially, I was 24, so it wasn't like I was super older compared to the students. Plus, I looked younger anyway, so it's not like I looked like the adult in the room. It was very uncomfortable to be I'm the teacher, I'm supposed to tell them what to do. And what I realized was, yes, it's super awkward for me because I've never done that before. But for the students, they come in and they sit down in a classroom and they expect there to be a teacher, right? They expect someone to come in, tell them what to do, give them directions, all that stuff. That's part of the deal. And I'm just in that role now, which is unusual for me. It's not unusual for them. And once I approached it from that point of view, it really, really helped, because I realized most of what I was nervous about was just up in my own head. And then now, so this is kind of the more exciting part here, is as I've been navigating this change, it just started to feel more right in my gut. It just felt like, yeah, that is the right thing to do. And I've had, which was ultra flattering, I've had people send me messages and comments and emails and things going why'd you change your name? Is everything okay? Why the name change? And then I explain it, and it's all been universally positive. I've even found a couple other people which is a very strange thing to discover, but having discussions about me that I'm not a part of, you find an online, a thread somewhere on social media or something, or in a comment section that's about you, but you're not part of it. And people are I think it was the right thing for him to do because it makes a lot more sense. And, that the brand is him, so it makes sense that he would be at the forefront. I'm oh, this is great to see that it kind of makes sense. And it's actually, it seems like it's aligning expectations more effectively in the people who find the stuff that I make, which is good because it's reducing any kind of friction between, what they're seeing and what they're expecting. And that's kind of always a good thing. But for me also, it's that thing of when sometimes you got to murder your darling to have everything else fall together. So there have been kind of these other things happening where I registered this website domain 10 years ago that was just hi-my-name-is-tom.com, which is the dumbest sounding URL. But the reason for that is because tombuck.com is taken. It's like a voiceover actor, which is great, but it's not me. And so I registered way back when, like a portfolio site that was just tomkbuck.com, because that's my middle initial. And that was fine, and it sounded right to me. But then I realized anytime I was trying to like give that email address to someone or give that URL to someone, they would always typo it because they would see the K and think that it was a typo. And so to me, it was like still very short and easy, but to everybody else, it was confusing because there was this seemingly random letter in the middle of it. And so it didn't really work. And that's why, like, okay, enthusiasmproject.com, that makes sense because it's the Enthusiasm Project. But something about like, hi, my name is Tom.com, just, it makes me laugh every time. And I didn't even have like a plan or a need for this. It was just like the URL was available. And I was like, I'm going to register this. And I've always just used it as a pointer to whatever my website is. Used to be a portfolio site back in the day. And now it's just been the Enthusiasm Project. So if you've gone to that URL, it would just take you to the Enthusiasm Project. But then I realized, well, if I'm not, like, am I going to use the Enthusiasm Project name anymore? And originally I was kind of thinking, well, the channel will be Tom Buck, but the videos can still be the Enthusiasm Project. But then it was just like, you can do that, but does that make sense? Like, is there a real purpose to that? Or is it just, again, being married to this idea that you've been stuck to for a number of years? And I just realized, for people who are brand new, who are coming into this, that's going to be just so confusing. It's not going to make any sense. If it's just me making my videos, that's going to make a lot more sense. And so I decided to just basically take it away from the YouTube channel entirely. And it feels okay now that I've been doing that. It was very kind of sad, but then once it's taken away there, I was like, well, what do I do with my website? I have this little website. It's not like huge or anything. There's nothing crazy on it, but I'm really proud of it. I love it. It's got some cool stuff on it. It's some good designs and whatnot. And my Rodecaster just made a very weird clicking noise. And I don't know, like, for a while I was like, well, okay, the Enthusiasm Project could be like what I refer to anything that I'm doing. Like, that's the project, is all the stuff that I'm making. It all comes together and involves a YouTube channel. It could involve podcasts, other stuff. But then I was like, well, I don't know. Does it make sense? And I was like, well, I have this URL that I've had for like a decade. Why don't I just use that? Because it's literally, hi, my name is Tom. And now I've changed this stuff to be my name, which is Tom. And it all just kind of merged up in a way that, like, again, doesn't sound, there are bigger things happening in the world, but in my little world, that actually makes a huge difference. And then I was able to kind of align things to that. So I went through my website, sort of switched it over to just be like my website, and it doesn't seem like it's this other entity, because that was something, sorry, I'm shifting in my chair because my foot went to sleep. But that is something that has always sort of irked me a little bit, is when people see the Enthusiasm Project, sometimes they think that it's a team of people, because it kind of seems like it, but it's not. It's just me. And the reason that bothers me is not because I want the credit for everything, but because I admire when I find things that are created by individuals. And I like that. I love it when I find someone who makes their own thing and they're kind of in it and they're doing a little bit of everything and figuring out all the parts of it themselves. And I like being somebody who does that. And so if it looks like that's not the case, that actually kind of bothers me a little bit, because that's something that I value very highly. And I don't really know why. There's something like empowering about that, because I guess maybe it's like my career is in public education. You want to know where you have very little autonomy? It's in public education. Everything has to get approved by 10 different layers. And the idea of like, this is my thing, I am in charge, I get to make all the decisions, I get to do all the stuff, it's just me, is really refreshing. And I think anybody who's worked at any kind of organization can relate to that. And that's why it's something that's so valuable to me. Plus, I know the motive behind it. It's not some weird, it's just not some weird thing where it looks like it's all, I don't know, little homemade DIY thing, but there's some giant corporation behind it that's just, I don't know, also dumping oil in the ocean or whatever. It's literally just me doing my thing. And I like that this communicates that a little more clearly. So it was really cool to take this thing that's just been sitting around And it's kind of been bothering me. I even had someone email me like 5 years ago, like, hey, this URL is really cool. Can I buy it from you? I want to use it for something. And I was like, well, I'm not really using it, but I don't want to let it go. So no, sorry, you can't have it. And I always felt kind of dumb because I was like, why am I hanging on to this thing? Why am I paying to renew it every year when I'm not really using it for anything? And then because of this change, this thing that I've had that I've wanted a home for, now it has a home and it makes more sense. And then this is why like the title of this episode is semi-clickbait. I was like, oh, my podcast. That makes sense to still call the Enthusiasm Project. I don't really know why. I don't know. I mean, I think the word project to me just like implies work in progress. And I very much feel like this podcast is always a work in progress. And it just sort of works. For whatever reason, I'm just kind of going with my gut. And that's, one of the things I've been trying to get better at is just trusting my gut instinct, trusting my gut impulses. And for whatever reason, it just makes sense. Like, yeah, you can have a YouTube channel with your name. You've got your website, which is your name because that makes sense, but it also kind of shows all the other stuff that you're doing. The podcast doesn't have to be your name because it can be this other thing. So that name that you do really like that still has like a special place to you still has a home. And now it's maybe even a little more of like a focused home because, okay, this is my podcast. What's it called? The Enthusiasm Project. Because you can't, unlike YouTube, you don't really have a podcast. It's just your name. I mean, you can do the Joe Rogan show, clearly like it does work, but if everybody's just the first name, last name show, like, it doesn't always work. So having a different name is more expected in the podcast realm, where on YouTube, it's like using your real name is almost more expected in a lot of ways. And so again, pieces just sort of fell into place because I stopped trying to choke an idea to life that wasn't there. And the cool part too is, going back to that original discussion, when Heather asked, why do you want to use this name? And I was like, well, it's really important to me because I like that the word enthusiasm is out there front and center. If somebody sees any of my stuff, that word is there. And I think that's really important because that is a quality and an attitude that I want to, spread. That's something that I think there needs to be more of in the world. And I think there's a lot of apathy. I think there's a lot of jadedness and cynicism, and I think a little bit of enthusiasm, projecting my enthusiasm, so to speak, is a great way to counteract that. And everybody I've said that to, because I think that's a great reason, everybody I've said that to says, yeah, but you're doing that anyway. Like you're doing that naturally through, you're making a video, you're making a podcast, like that comes through. And then it got me thinking, okay, so I was like, okay, I redid like my little channel description, which again is one of those things like how many people actually read your channel description? Very, very few probably. But when you have to go through and write something like that, it kind of forces you, it's a great exercise, I should say, in forcing yourself to sort of analyze things and think about things in a different way. And so rewriting my channel description, I was like, I don't want to just like drop the Enthusiasm project name entirely, but I can be almost clever and wedge it in here somehow. So the description says like, I started this channel in 2017 as a project to share my enthusiasm about blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that is like, it's just sort of cheeky and goofy, but it is also true. Like literally it's a project. It's an ongoing thing to share my enthusiasm for, digital media, helping other people get better at making videos, making audio and all that kind of stuff, because that's what I'm excited about. And that is literally what I'm enthusiastic about. And that got me back into the mindset of why versus what. And so, the what of what I'm doing is making YouTube videos, talking about cameras, doing some tutorials, doing reviews, doing a podcast, that kind of stuff. But the why behind I'm doing that is because I want to help people get excited about something that I'm very enthusiastic about. I want to share that enthusiasm with a lot of other people so they get excited about it, because I know I can't think of the word. It's escaping me right now, but I know that the empowerment, that's the word, that comes with expressing yourself with these tools and with these methods. And I just think that that's a valuable thing. It's not necessarily right for everybody, of course, but it's something that I am excited about. But that's my why. Like, I can't, like, who can, that's a very corny reason to like tell people why you're making a YouTube. You can just say, like, hey, I made a video about how to edit in a certain way, or check out this microphone review. Cool. But everything that goes into that is tied into the why of what I'm doing. And the reason that I frame it that way is because right before this school year started, like a month ago, our principal at like our professional development meeting, it's very traditional at back to school professional development meetings for there to be like some cheesy inspirational things. And they're usually pretty cheesy, whether it's your school putting it on or the district or whatever. But this year's weird because everything was just on Zoom, of course. But our principal wanted to share a video, and it was like why versus what, or find your why or something. And I forget, all the details of it, but one of the clips was from like a TED Talk or a speaker talking to a group of people. And he called out to someone in the audience. I guess it was, this would have been a very weird request if he didn't know who was in the audience, but I think it was like a group of musicians or music teachers or something. It was this huge like conference or something. And the speaker called out to this one guy and was like, hey, sir, can you sing? And it's like this big dude. And he's like, yeah, I can sing. He's like, okay, can you just sing Amazing Grace? And the guy's like, yeah, okay. And he sang Amazing Grace, and it sounded awesome. Like, he just did a great job singing the song. But it just kind of sounded like you've heard the song many times. And he was like, okay, now I want you to sing the song again, but this time I want you to sing it as if you're somebody who's like been in jail for like 20 years, and maybe you didn't even do the thing that like put you in jail, and you've just been dying to get out, and now you're free. You have your whole life together. You're reunited with like your family that you've been separated from for 2 decades. How would you sing the song then? And the guy belted out an entirely different version of that song. Same lyrics, same level of talent in the performer both times, but the motivation behind each performance was just so different that it really changed everything. And so that was actually like a really awesome thing to see. It just stuck with me for whatever reason, because it was such a clear example of exactly this idea. What you're doing is not necessarily as important as why you're doing it, but you don't always have to tell people the why. And for someone like me, who over-contextualizes everything habitually, that's a very important thing to learn. I don't have to tell you, well, the reason I want to make this video is very philosophical and like crazy, or the reason I'm doing this podcast is, tied to some existential thing that I'm working through. No, I can just do the thing, but my intrinsic motivation of doing it is going to frame how I create everything and how I put it all together in a really specific way. And that's what's going to change, that's what's going to change the outcome of it. And I think that it absolutely makes a total difference, is just sort of knowing the why. So just that, like reframing the YouTube channel description and saying, well, I started this channel as a project to share my enthusiasm about these things. Oh, so that's the goal. And I mean, that is a guiding thing, because I don't want to, that's going to kind of not change, but in a way dictate what goes into the channel, just the way that it always has. Like, clearly that means like you can't say I want to share my enthusiasm and then do a bunch of really negative, mean, critical, harsh videos, right? Because that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's going to make sure that I stay positive with things. It also means like I'm probably not going to do a cooking tutorial, not only because I'm generally terrible at cooking, but because I'm sitting here saying this is a project to share my enthusiasm about, cameras, audio, video, digital media. So there we go. That's the what, and then the why is built in behind it. And as long as I am in tune with the why of what I'm doing, the what will take care of itself, and then that gives it that intangible. It's just sort of it is that thing you can't tell what it is, but if it's not there, it's missing. And whatever that quality is, maybe because something is being made out of care and not out of like obligation or cynicism or whatever. That's, I think, something that people can connect to, even if it's at like an instinctual level. And then maybe that's what can help build a stronger community around these things, or at least help me be a part of a larger community or a larger conversation about all this stuff that I'm so excited about and that I care about so much. So to take this idea then and change the spotlight from me to you, why does this journey, so to speak, like how does this have any effect on what you're doing? I think that it is very important not just to understand the why behind what you're doing, but to also not be afraid to try new things, package things a little differently, change the perspective a little bit, because that's going to give you a lot more clarity over what you're doing. And as silly as it can seem to be like, you're talking about a YouTube channel or a podcast, those things, that YouTube channel is thousands upon thousands of hours of my life and thousands upon thousands of dollars of my money. So there's a lot invested in there. I actually do really care about it. It can seem very just like goofy and simple, but no, that's a huge investment in a lot of different ways. And the reason that I'm willing to make that investment is because I find some kind of value in it. It's definitely not because of all the riches and fame and stuff like that, because it's something more intrinsic. And that doesn't mean that your thing needs to be a YouTube channel, but if you're making something, it's the why behind why you're doing it and respecting the time that you put into it. I think it is okay to kind of go down these routes and spend time thinking about these things, because that is respecting the effort that you're putting into it. I think this must have been like almost a year ago maybe, but I remember telling a story where I had made, you know what? This was actually my first sponsored video. So this was just about a year ago. I've done one sponsored video on my channel, and I put the video out, and the sponsor was Epidemic Sound, which completely makes sense because I've used them forever and they're really great people. The video, though, honestly, the video was fine. It's just the context of it wasn't the best fit. And what they wanted to do was not just sponsor a video, but they're like, we want to sponsor a video that highlights our like business subscriptions. And I was like, okay, I mean, at the time I was, Heather and I were like trying to form our LLC, like business was very much on the mind, and it just kind of made sense. But I remember it is kind of, it was a little hard for me to figure out how to frame, because I do everything personally. I don't use the business side of stuff. I use the individual side of things. And I should have just right there been like, oh, that, doesn't really make sense for me. I'm sure they would have just been like, oh, well, you want to do the individual one, do that instead. But I didn't know any better. And that was half the reason I wanted to do the sponsorship anyway, was to just sort of see how this works. And they were people I trusted to guide me through the process. And that was a good decision because they're great people. But the video didn't really do very well. And I was so hesitant about releasing sponsored content that video came out on Thursday. And then Friday, the next day, I was like, well, and the video didn't do that well. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just post my next video, which, I had worked very hard to build up my little content library to release my video every week. And I just sort of got like nervous / excited because my next video was one I was really excited to share. And I was like, well, I'll just do that one right now. So I did a video on Thursday and Friday. And then I was like, well, now I got to like kind of work double time to sort of get back where I was. Plus now the sponsored video is kind of getting overshadowed by the new video I uploaded. And what I realized was that was not being respectful of my work, like the time that I put into both of those videos, which was a very real thing. The time, energy, and effort to create those things, I wasn't respecting that by treating them that way. And that's basically how I feel, if you're creating all this stuff and you're putting these things out there, but you're not taking the time to think about why you're doing it, you're not taking the time to consider the branding that goes into it, that might mean that you're also not respecting the effort and the energy and the pieces of you that you gave to these things to create them in the first place. So I think that's hugely important to have those thoughts and to spend time thinking about those things and to change if you need to change without feeling like you're stuck to something just because that's the way you've always done it. And it will also then give you the ability to firmly, stand your ground when you need to, like when dealing with sponsorships, for example. It's been great the last, I have gotten so ruthless with just saying no to everything, which, I say no to everything all the time, but it's great because it's just that thing of like, if it's not a clear yes, it's a clear no. And that was something I got out of the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown, which is a really great way to look at stuff. If what you're looking at is not a clear yes, and that means it's a clear no, and you just say no to everything. And there have been a lot of times now after my like rebranding session where there's even been stuff where I'm like, I kind of would sort of like to work with that company or that product or whatever, but I just say no, because I don't want to deal with anything else that goes into it. It goes back to that ethics statement that I talked about where it's very brand unfriendly because it just puts so much power into my hands and not into their hands. But you know what? This isn't client work. Like, if you want to sponsor something that I'm doing, that's because you like what I'm doing, not because you're just trying to buy your way into an audience that I built. That's not anything that I'm interested in at all. So if you want to be a part of this, you want to be a part of it in my way because it's my freaking thing. Like, it's my sandbox. So if you want to play here, you got to play by my rules. If you don't, that's completely fine. And clearly most people don't, but you go somewhere else then where you can play with those rules. And having a clear identity, having a clear sense of that, having a clear sense of your values, they don't have to be the same as mine, of course. Like, they can be entirely different or contradictory, but whatever they are, having your own sense of them is very important to help guide you in all of these things as you work to not only create whatever the thing is that you're creating and put it out there in the world, but to then respect yourself and respect the work that you're doing, respect the time, energy, and effort and money that you're putting into it in the first place. And that all comes back down to just understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And so this has been an awesome lesson for me to learn as I sort of unexpectedly rebranded and shifted everything after 3 years. So if you can take any kind of lessons or, I don't know, learn from my experience in any way, I think that, that's why I'm sharing it with you, because hopefully it can be a little bit helpful. So at least for now, I guess, from here on out, my channel is just me. It's just Tom Buck. That's my YouTube channel. And everything on it is just me, period. But it's a project to share my enthusiasm. My website is just me. This podcast is still the Enthusiasm Project because that's what this is, which gives the Enthusiasm Project a more specific identity. So in a way, it also makes me feel like I don't know what the word would be, but I'm helping or honoring that name, that title, that thing that I've created by giving it a more clear, specific identity. So the Enthusiasm Project still lives here in this podcast. It just doesn't live directly, by name, on the other stuff anymore. And I feel really great about that. And it has been really fun to dive through that process. So, geez, I feel like we went to a few places there, but I hope you got something valuable out of it. Of course, as always, you can reach out to me. I love to hear thoughts and feedback about podcasts. You can leave an email. Sure. Yeah, why not? You can send me a fax. You can leave a voice message at anchor.fm/enthusiasm. You can always reach out to me at SoDarnTom and all the things. And of course, the YouTube channel, youtube.com/TomBuck. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for spending an hour with me.